So if I want just the mouse to show up as, or to make the mouse not show up so I just see the player object, what I can do anywhere in my code, but this would make sense to do at the beginning. So when I add player, then what I can do is say mouse dot hide. And that tells my mouse, I don't want to see you. So a big part of making this work is not knowing how to do it in the beginning per se, and say, no, now I know what I'm doing so I can now do it. A big part is thinking through logically an order of execution. The code executes line 1, then line 2, then line 3. The import statement's flashed it. Again, we're not going to care about that. Then I say, line 4, I want my player object. So I need to create my player object and then add it. Then I set its X and Y just so it's not at 0, 0. Then I can say player start listening for enter frame. And then I define what happens. I want my player's X and Y equal to the mouse's X and Y. So he will move with me. Well, then I need to start creating enemies. Now, some of these things will become stock that you will use them time and time and time again. Other things will be unique problems you need to solve, so you have to think about the order of how you want to go through things, the sequence of events. That will become part of what you start trying to fit into your projects. Generally, in the beginning, you're going to start with a template or pieces, snips or chunks of someone else's code and bastardize that into your own code. That's how you begin. It's back in the day, back in the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s, when people first started doing web pages, there weren't books. There weren't even a lot of tutorials that you could even find online. You just found a web page and then found out you could study the source image, and then you found out how to get files uploaded onto a server, and you found a page. That's a cool page. Look at their code. Bastardize a chunk of that. Stick it on your own. Ooh, look. Now I have a line blinking and flashing on screen. Look, now I have a dancing hamster or something silly like that. And you start putting that stuff in. You don't know what you're doing. You just copy someone else's code, see the results, and go, oh, that worked, or oh, that didn't. And then you make an adjustment. Flash programming grew the same way. In the beginning, nobody knew what they were doing. They just started putting stuff up. You had a few rock stars in the industry who came from what would be a more dedicated computer science background. So they'd studied coding in a variety of other languages first, so they were well versed in it. And then they said, wow, this Flash tool really sucks, because to do coding, it was all through wizards. You couldn't actually type any code. And then Flash 4 came out, and it let you have the option. You could type code or you could use a wizard. And that's when it really took off, because then you could start typing code and you found other people's code and you started working on how to optimize the code and you started trying to figure out what's a good way to do this. Then the language grew and evolved and became a standardized ECMAScript-based language, and that brings us to where we are now, and you can type in the code. Are you going to know what to type in the beginning? No. You go find something that's close to a starting point and you start working from there based on what you know. And then you start sending me all kinds of emails with your file attached and say, I'm doing this, it's not working, here's the file, can you take a look at it? And I say, sure. Because staying up late debugging other people's code is one of those perverse joys I have in life where I actually like doing that. It's just who I am. So don't be afraid to send me your broken code and say, I'm trying to do this, it's broken. Can you help me see the errors of my ways? And I will try and steer you to the light, to the correct path, the straight and narrow, so that we can all achieve fun. So that's what we're trying to aim for. So that's my little soapbox. Feel free to fast forward through that if you go back and watch this on video at a future point. Or if you want a nice inspirational speech, you can go back and watch that as well. It's up to you. So currently now the player shows up, the enemy shows up, and it moves itself across the screen, but we don't have any interaction with it. So what would be nice is to work out some type of interaction. Now I could set it up so that the interaction is whack-a-mole style, so it's responding to a mouse click. That's a very common first level of interaction that we build into a project, that we have to click on something to get a result. It's a good thing to start with, so if I want to do that, what I can do is I can tell these enemies, hey, why don't you listen for someone to click you? And if so, go away. We'll worry about collision detection next week. Tonight we're going to worry about clicks. Next week we'll worry about when the two objects collide, how do we register that, measure that, and respond to that, and find out that there are inherent limitations and difficulties with Flash's collision detection. If you go pick up any book on doing game programming with Flash, a good half of the book is devoted to strategies for collision detection. So having object A run into object B, what's the best method for figuring that out? Each book uses a different method, different set of techniques, and what you will come to realize is there's no magic bullet, there's no magic, hey, Flash, this object touched this one, respond to it. There are some techniques that work well, but they're very processor intensive, so if you have 1,000 objects on screen, your thing comes to a standstill. There are other ones less processor intensive that work well with lots of objects, but they're less precise. So it's always going to be a matter of give and take. But tonight, we shall worry about the click. Making these enemy objects clickable is essentially the same as making them a button. The button code we used in the past, we registered a mouse event.click. So we will do that, except we'll steer away from the click event and try a different event, because the click event is not as precise as we may want for this instance. So, without any further ado, we told the enemies to do their enemy loop, which makes them move across the screen. And then what we can also do is say enemy.add event listener mouse event click. So we'll start out with a click. Whoops, I hit return one too many times. Now, click is not going to be our best option because click requires me to press down and let up on the mouse button for it to register. If I press and hold down the mouse button, that's not actually a click. A click is I click the mouse button. So if I click the mouse button, click, that's a click. We can also do mouse down, we could also do mouse up, but for now we'll just stick with click. And now I will have a function, click handler, and I just simply need to define that function. Function click handler. And then I do E:, E is going to be the relative name for my event. And then we need to say the event type that matches what was listed in my event listener. So I can say mouse event, like this. Doesn't return anything, so it's void, curly brace, ending curly brace, so we can see now we're off to a good start. All right, I'm just going to delete some extra returns in here so my code stays a little bit higher on screen as I type. I'm going to shrink this down just a little bit so I can keep it up higher for people in the back. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to tell the enemy to go away. But if we're going to tell the enemy to go away, we also need to tell the enemy to quit listening for its enter frame event. Otherwise, Flash gets grumpy with us. So the first thing I'm going to do when I click on it is I'm going to just tell the object, hey, you're done moving. And the way that I will do that is I will remove the event listeners on this object, because currently we have event listeners on the object. When I want to get rid of them, instead of saying enemy.add event listener, I would say enemy.remove event listener. But because I can't use the word enemy here, I have to use the same relative naming scheme that I used in enemy loop. So how did I refer to my enemy object in enemy loop? What did I call it? e.target. So I say e.target. Now, I could retype all of this, but it's much easier to say remove and then go grab the rest of this, like this, and put it down here. And for that matter, I can easily just copy that whole line, paste, change this to a e.target, and then change the add to a remove. Now the reason I have to be so specific on my remove event listener, event enter frame, comma, enemy loop, you could have, it would be bad coding, but you could have multiple enter frame listeners attached to this object. So if you only wanted to remove 3 of them and you had 6 attached, you could list those 3. So that's why we don't just say remove event listener. We have to say which event and which the specific function it's calling. So Flash requires us to be this precise because we can have as many event listeners of the same type registered with a given object. So when I click on the object, theoretically it should stop moving if I have done everything correctly. So I will save, I will run, and click. Now I'm having a little problem clicking on the object because I put the blue guy there, and notice, you see anything happening is that his registration point is kind of off, and if we look at the library, he doesn't follow where I'm clicking. So if I look in the player, where I click, I have to position that crosshair over the orange object, the enemy object, for my click to take effect. So that's slightly problematic and is going to need some fixing, which we will tackle next.